Hello, my name's Ben Wilson. I'm the ACCA's expert tutor for the AAA exam paper. Now this session, this topic explainer, is going to focus on current issues. This is an area that many students struggle with in AAA. They don't know how best to prepare for current issues. They don't know how it's tested, and they don't have good exam technique for current issues questions. So this topic explainer is going to make sure that you know how current issues are tested, how best to prepare for them, and I'm going to give you a demonstration of great exam technique for a current issues question so that you are well prepared if this comes up in your exam. So we'll start with a bit of a recap of current issues. What is it that they can test you on as a current issue? What does the examiner define as a current issue? Then I'm going to give you a bit of insight on how current issues are tested in the AAA exam. Then I'll give you my top tips, how to be successful in a current issues question. And then we'll finish off with a demonstration of great exam technique using a current issues question I've written so that you know how to approach a current issues question in the exam. So the topic recap, first of all, what is it that the examiner defines as a current issue? Well, it's pretty straightforward. A current issue is anything that the examiner has published a technical article on. You can find these technical articles on the ACCA's website. You probably know where they are already, but if you don't, just Google AAA technical articles and you'll find them on the ACCA's website. And these articles are really nicely organised by topic area, by syllabus area, which makes them really easy to refer to. Now, when you do go to the ACCA website and look at these articles and bite-sized videos, you will see that some of them aren't actually covering current issues. There are some on other things like areas where students have been struggling or some exam technique guidance, but hopefully that'll be fairly obvious to you when you go and look at the ACCA's website. One thing I wanted to note here is that recent world events, so stuff that has been happening in the news right here and right now, it's not going to be examinable. If something is a current issue that ACCA intend to test you on, it will have been flagged as part of a technical article. Now, that doesn't mean that ACCA won't be bringing in up-to-date things in the scenarios that they base your exam questions on. What it does mean is that you're not expected to have any wider knowledge around anything that's in a scenario unless it's been flagged as part of a technical article. And if, let's say, the industry is something new that uses artificial intelligence, for example, well, they'll tell you everything that you really need to know in the scenario, right? Rather than expecting you to know anything particularly about it in advance or other than just sort of general wider business acumen and business awareness. So you now know that you need to be all over those technical articles so that you know what can be examined as a current issue in the exam. Now, how are they then tested? Well, first thing to say is it's generally for about 5 marks in the exam. Sometimes a few more, sometimes a few less, maybe up to 8 marks maximum. But around 5 marks are for current issues. And the most common type of current issues question will be scenario based. So in the context of a particular scenario, can you show that you have understood some of the issues around this particular technical article? For example, there's a technical article on data analytics. And a previous exam question or recent exam question might focus on how would data analytics impact the planning, or the use of data analytics impact the planning or performance of this particular audit. And so you're showing you've understood the technical article because you need to know a bit about data analytics, but you're also showing you can apply that knowledge by picking out things that are relevant and explaining them in the context of this particular audit, perhaps to address some of the challenges that have been identified in the scenario. So those scenario-based ones are the most common, but we do get knowledge-based questions as well, where the examiner actually specifically says you don't need to use the scenario at all here. And they'll ask you a pure knowledge-based question to show that you have, well, perhaps memorized or learned the content of a technical article. Now that might be, recent ones there have been around ISQM1, ISQM2, which are the quality management standards. There are 2 technical articles on those. Another recent one on sustainability assurance as well. Now, I wanted to just really kind of try to put you off from memorising all the technical articles. There are loads of them, and some of them are pretty big and pretty detailed. To memorise the content of those technical articles, it's going to take you ages. And look at the number of marks. Is it worth it? I mean, for me, it's a big, resounding no. It is not a worthwhile investment of your time to memorise the content of all of those technical articles. What it is worth you doing is making sure you've got a decent understanding of those technical articles. And perhaps you've got like a key point summary of each one, so you know the important things that are in there. And when I get one of these knowledge questions, instead of having memorised the technical article, what I do is I think, well, the examiner said I don't need to use the scenario, but they haven't told me that I'm not allowed to. They haven't prohibited it. In fact, there will almost certainly be some things I could use in the scenario to spark ideas in my mind. Because the scenario will be in the context of whatever this technical area is, around sustainability or quality management or whatever it is. So I know that if I go through that scenario, I will find some things in there that will perhaps spark a thought or an idea in my mind that I can use to then generate an effective answer. So for me, I wouldn't advise you to memorise those technical articles. Make sure you've got a good understanding of them and then use good exam technique to get you through. Now, my top tips for success with current issues. Firstly, when you're reading those technical articles, at least the 5 that I suggested, and ideally all of them, you do so actively. You don't just read. You read and you make notes at the same time. Because by making your own notes as you're reading the article, you are much more likely to retain the key points. So I would read the article first of all, skim read it, and then read it again, making summary short notes. Maybe, 5 or 6 notes per article. And these are effectively your revision notes for that article. And just before the exam, you can skim read over those revision notes as a bit of a reminder. My third tip, when you are doing a current issues question, very often the answers to the question are in the scenario, and your job is to squeeze that answer out of the information that you're given in the scenario. You're going to see me do this in a second with a demonstration question. But what I do is I take facts from the scenario. I always try and start my point in a current issues question with a specific fact from the scenario, and then I take that fact and I develop it. I run with it to explain how that fact is relevant to answering the question. I develop it into a mark scoring point. Now, this is a great technique for scenario-based quality management questions, current issues questions, but it's also really helpful in a factual, knowledge-based question. Because even in a knowledge-based question, they will always give you a few facts in the scenario that you can use and run with, and you can pick up a few marks and then move on. Time for that demonstration. We're going to use a question I've written on current issues to show you great technique for one of these questions. So here's the scenario showing on screen and the requirement. Now, obviously, good exam technique, you start by reading the requirement and setting up an answer structure, which I've already done. So we need to look for benefits of using data analytics in this company's audit. And what I'd like you to do now is firstly read through the scenario so that you're familiar with it. Pause the recording here so that you can read through the scenario. Right. In this demonstration, we are going to base everything in the answer on facts in this scenario. So let's pick out some relevant facts. In this first paragraph, we're told that this is a new audit client of our firm. Now, how's that relevant? Why is it beneficial to use data analytics if this is a new audit client? Well, when it's a new audit client, the auditor has to get a good understanding of the business. They have to really understand Monkey Company so that, well, they can identify where to focus their audit attention. What are the high-risk areas? If you don't know the business, then you can't really identify where to focus your audit attention. So using data analytics, we can get a better understanding of the client by taking some of their management information and putting it into nice graphs, nice data visualizations, so that we can really understand their numbers, maybe compare it to market trends on things like profitability levels or sales growth rates. So I would say we've got a good point here, and I'm going to get it into my answer plan. This is exactly how I answer the question in the exam, by the way. I get my idea and I write it in brief note form like this. And then when I've made my answer plan, I then write up each of the points by extending out each of these planned points. So it's a new client, that's the fact. We need to get an understanding of the client's business, and we can do that using data visualizations. And that will help us to identify where to focus during the audit. Lovely. We've got our first point. How many do we need in total? Well, it's 6 marks. You know it's 1 mark per well-explained point in most AAA questions. It's only audit risk and business risk that are more than 1 mark per point. Audit risk is 3 marks, business risk is 2 marks, everything else is 1 mark per well-explained point. So we need 6 points in total. We're well on our way. What about in this second paragraph? Was there anything interesting and relevant in here? Ooh, they've introduced a new accounting software package. And that new package was operated alongside the old system, in parallel, the 2 systems running together. Now, that's pretty common practice, I think. When you introduce a new system, you run the old one with the new one to make sure the new one is working properly. But, well, how do you make sure the new one's working properly? Well, it should have the same data in it as the old one. So that's an area we can use data analytics. We can make sure all of the data that is within the new system is identical to the old system. And, well, data analytics will be super helpful here, because instead of manually checking every data point, which would take forever, well, we can test everything very, very quickly using data analytics, because you can just go, well, find any differences. So let's get that point planned out. So that new software package, we can compare the data in the new and the old systems to identify differences. It wouldn't be practical to do this manually because of the volume of transactions. And so what we're doing here, how data analytics is helping us, is it's reducing sampling risk. Sampling risk is, well, it's a problem during the audit. That's that the auditor, well, can't test everything manually. It's not practical to do so. They pick a sample. And there could be an error, a misstatement in the population that is not tested. And so by using data analytics here, we can test everything, and it reduces or removes sampling risk. When it comes to writing up my answer, by the way, I will explain what sampling risk is, because anytime you use a technical term like this, you should always show you understand what it is in your explanation. Right, next, we're told this stuff about the previous auditor's files. Oh, and controls weren't working over credit limits. They were allowing credit to customers who were already over their credit limit. That's a weakness in controls. That control was not operating effectively. Now, how's that relevant to this audit? Well, it might still not be working properly, that control. So we can use data analytics to identify if that control is now operating effectively. We can look at all through the year, we can compare customers' credit limits, the amount they should be allowed as credit. We can compare that to the amount that they were actually extended. So with these credit limit controls, we can test every single customer and compare their credit limit, what they should be allowed, to how much they were sold. And, well, if they were sold more than their credit limit, this control was not operating. We can identify any breaches. And if there are no breaches, that tells us the control is operating effectively. That's good for our audit, but it also is good to be able to report that back to the client. that your control has been working perfectly all the way through the year. I'm trying it with each of my points to make my explanation a little bit different. The benefit of using data analytics to be slightly different in each of the points so that I score more marks. You tend not to score marks in AAA for repeating yourself. Right, next up, we're told about a payroll fraud. Oof. And in that payroll fraud, the supervisor added fake employees to the payroll and then paid their wages into his own bank account. Ooh, sneaky. Now, how would the auditor pick that up? And how could data analytics help? Well, we could go through all of the bank account details that are registered for each employee. And if there are any that have the same bank accounts, that would tell us that something dodgy is going on. So we can use data analytics to compare all of the bank account details of all of the employees and see if any of them match. So we can test that payroll standing data. Standing data is the bank details. And we can look for any duplicates, employees with the same bank account, or anything else that's the same. Because you shouldn't have employees, really, unless you, have a husband and wife that work for you and live together. They should all have different addresses. They should all have different bank account details, particularly. And if there are any with matching details, we can then investigate them. And that will give us some comfort that the fraud is no longer happening. Right, how many points have we got? We've got 4 points. And we need 2 more. Into the last paragraph. We're told that the audit report was delayed. Oof. The market was hungry for this audit report, but it didn't get it because it was delayed. The financial statements were delayed because we had to get additional evidence over receivables and payrolls. Well, how can data analytics help here? Well, if you have to manually test things during an audit, it takes ages. I can tell you from my experience as an auditor, I spent 4 or 5 years working at KPMG in London doing audits about 20 odd years ago. And during that time, we didn't have data analytics. We did have to do things manually and it was painful. Everything took ages. Whereas now, using data analytics, the computer is much, much quicker than the manual junior auditor. So we can be quicker in doing our work and therefore we can release the audit report more quickly. And that's going to be beneficial to any users of the financial statements and the audit report. They can make decisions more quickly. So using data analytics is more efficient. We will take less time over manual audit work and therefore we can release the audit report on time. That's going to be beneficial for users of the accounts so that they can make any decisions. Oh no, I've only got 5 points and I've reached the end of the scenario. What do I do? Well, 2 things. One is don't worry about it. If you've got 5 points for a 6 marks question, that's absolutely fine. Just move on. But, well, look at the verb in the question. The verb in the question was discuss. And any time the verb is discuss, you get a mark for doing something at the end. Do you know what it is? Yes, it's having a conclusion. So a conclusion is going to be worth a mark here. How are we going to know this is a conclusion? How's the marker going to know? Well, obviously, because I've titled it conclusion and I've got a little subheading. Now, my conclusion here has to refer back to the question. So I'm discussing the benefits. So my conclusion has to say there are massive benefits or there aren't many benefits. Say yes or say no. Okay, here I'm definitely saying yes. I've found lots of really significant benefits. So my conclusion is going to say yes, data analytics will really help, be very beneficial, but I have to justify my conclusion for it to score. And what I mean by justify the conclusion is I have to support it with some evidence by saying which of these benefits do I think are particularly significant. So for me, I'm saying yes, it is a significant benefit. And those benefits, the ones that I'm going to use to justify it, is I can test all of the transactions, getting more evidence, and that improves audit quality by reducing detection risk and makes the audit more time efficient. I could have actually made this conclusion a bit shorter. It's perhaps a little bit long. Anyway, we're not all perfect, are we? Right, that's my answer plan, and that's exactly what I would have done in the exam. Now, if I ran out of time at this point, my answer plan would be submitted. And it would still get marked, and I would still score some credit. Not full credit, but I would still score some credit. But hopefully you've been managing your time effectively during the exam, so you have time to take your answer plan, which I've just moved over to this side of the screen. It's exactly the same plan. I've just moved it over here, and we're going to turn each of these points into a full written answer. Now in the exam, I would do this by just extending out each of the points, and my plan becomes my answer. And I try and do it in as time efficient a way as possible. So I don't try to write long sentences. I try to keep everything short. So my first point was about this being a new client. I can get a better understanding of the business using data visualizations. And the benefit of that is it helps me to identify where to focus my audit attention. So here's that point written up. Have a little read of it. Short, isn't it? Short points, short words, easy to understand, easy to mark. Yeah, and that's the style I would really recommend that you go for in AAA. So you've seen me write up the first one. Why don't you pause the recording here and have a go at writing up all of the remaining points? And then you can compare your answer to mine. Right, hopefully you've had a go now at writing up each of these points. And if you haven't, pause the recording now and do it. It will be really beneficial for you. I promise you'll get more out of it if you do it. Right, hopefully you have actually done it now. Let's compare our answers. So my second point was about comparing data from the old and the new package to make sure that there are no differences. So I'm actually going to split this point into two separate points. The reason being is that it was a bit long for one individual point, and I like to leave a gap between my points so that the marker finds it easier to assess the information that I've given. So I'm saying it's not practical to manually check the two systems, and I can use data analytics to compare everything in the old and the new system. Anything that's different indicates issues with the new package. And look, I've explained what sampling risk is in my answer. Sampling risk would be reduced as every transaction could be tested. I've shown that I understand sampling risk in the way that I've written that answer. And that's something I really try and do with any technical term. Lovely. I try and keep all of my points to this sort of length, by the way. And if they get longer, I break them up so that it's easier for the marker. Next one was about credit limits. So these controls were breached in the prior year. I can use data analytics to compare the available credit limit to the credit extended with a new sale. Any instances where the credit limit was breached would give evidence that the control is around control operation. Excellent, short and sweet. Next one was around payroll fraud. And I can use data analytics here as well. Test the standing payroll data, searching for any duplicates. And I can investigate them further. And I can test all of the payroll data, and that will give me some comfort that this fraud is no longer happening. My last point was about being quicker, wasn't it? Okay, more efficient testing, and therefore I'm more likely to release the report on time. That's a benefit to users of the financial statements so that they can make decisions. Again, these ones are slightly longer. I could possibly have made them a little bit shorter. But anyway, I was enjoying writing. And my last point is the conclusion. My conclusion, the benefits are significant. A short, punchy conclusion. And then I justify it using some of the points from up here, my more significant points, to explain why those benefits are so significant. If you want to read through this answer in more detail, you can pause the recording here and go back over it. But that's us done for this session. I hope you found this topic explainer useful and you feel much better prepared for current issues in the AAA exam.